Alison is in the studio with me. Alison was married to an undercover police officer leading that double life. No apologies, you're shaking your head.
I was not married.
You were not married.
No.
My apologies for getting that wrong.
He was married.
He was married, right. My apologies. Can I ask you first, thank you for coming in and talking to us. When you look back on that relationship, it must be very disorienting for a start. But do you now regard it as a relationship at all?
That's an interesting question. I mean, it was a relationship. It did feel real at the time. I was with Mark Cassidy, as I knew him. His real name is Mark Jenner, for 5 years. And much of that felt real, certainly from my perspective. Looking back on it, however, I realise that I was part of a systemic police operation that was lasting 50 years, has gone on for over 50 years, across all progressive groups in this country. Something akin to the Stasi. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that. So I think one of the things that the Crown Prosecution Service has said, the reason they've given for not wanting to prosecute any of these officers for the state rape, is that they argued there were genuine feelings involved. And what we would say in response to that was, yes, there was genuine lust, but these officers,
part of the men,
part of the men,
but you can't.
They should never have been in our lives.
Nobody can attach the word genuine to a relationship that you were made ignorant about.
Right. It was based on deceit. We didn't give informed consent. The unit, we believe, was institutionally sexist and misogynist. Women were used as props to shore up the men's identities.
It's abusive.
Yeah, absolutely abusive.
And what you talked about different progressive groups.
Yeah.
May I ask about the political activist work you were involved in?
Yeah, I mean, I was involved in an organisation called the Colin Roach Centre, which was named after a black man who was killed in contact with the police. Our campaigning was around anti-racism, immigration advice. There was police monitoring because it was in Hackney, and there was known to be police corruption in that part of Hackney. I went to meetings, I gave out leaflets. I think one of the things that is quite apparent is it's ironic that the activities and the activism and the campaigning I'm involved in now has much more impact than anything I was ever involved in when Mark Jenner and others were spying on me.
You mean
and my comrades.
activism in relation to this?
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Take us back then to when you met him as Mark Cassidy.
Yeah. I mean, I will take you back. I would also say watch the documentary because there's a lot of video footage in there of Mark. He was a lovely bloke from Birkenhead. He said he was a joiner. He presented as being a bit politically naive and so was just interested in finding out more. He'd come to London for work. And, I fancied him. I think I made a move on him. I don't think he made the first move. I wasn't vulnerable. Many of the women who were in relationships with men were preyed upon and were vulnerable when these officers began the relationships. I'm not sure I was. I think all the relationships are different, but there are so many parallels and they come from the same unit and their managers knew exactly what was going on. He was a nice guy who was involved in our group, and then after 5 years he disappeared. He said that I wanted children. We'd been in a relationship counselling for 1.5 years, and he said he didn't want children. Now I understand that that's because he had his own children and family. And he disappeared, and I couldn't find trace for him, and that made me more determined to try to find him. And the more I looked, the more it became clear to me that he had lied about many elements of his backstory. And I came to believe that he was an agent of the state. It was only after about a year, and after I met Helen Steele, who's another one of the women in the documentary, that I was sure that he was a member of the Metropolitan Police Special Branch.
How high up do you think the instructions to this unit went?
Well, there's a public inquiry underway. It was established in 2014. Its end date originally was 2018. It's now due to report in 2026. There was an interim report last year that said, had the public known about these units, they would have been disbanded. They were unjustified and unlawful deployments. It's becoming clear that the customer for the intelligence product, I mean, this is their language, was MI5. So the security services definitely knew.
To see which of you was the wrong one.
I'm not even sure I'm sure there were wrong uns amongst us,
Well,
but
that's not me saying it. That's,
No, but people will say
they're
that.
looking for wrong uns, aren't
Absolutely.
they?
Well,
Yeah.
they're not actually. They're not even
No?
doing that. No, they're looking for intelligence. They call it intelligence. I think that's a misnomer in itself. They're looking for information about anybody who is involved in a progressive movement. And what we're seeing from the public inquiry, the information they're gathering is basically gossip, rumour. It's so banal, much of it. It's, who's having an affair with who's on, got alcohol or drug problems. And we believe that a lot of that is for vetting, they would call it. We would call it blacklisting. Also perhaps to turn informers. And just to keep, and also to undermine these movements. I mean, there is a question that we don't know the answer to. It's a kind of question for public discourse, really. But to what extent is the country and the planet in the mess it's in now? I mean, I wasn't an environmentalist. I kind of joke I was a bit more red than green, but there were plenty of green activists who were spied on. To what extent were some of the politics that they were involved in undermined and sabotaged and derailed, leaving us in this, like the mess that we are now in.
What impact did it have on you once you realised the full picture, or the fuller picture, that not only was he not the person you thought he was, that others had had a similar experience and received the same letter, and that sort of, just the shock of that deceit? What did that do to you?
Well, everybody has a different story with this. And my story personally is that I had, 2 or 3 very dark years, 20, 25 years ago when I found out. And I was very on my own with it. People thought I was paranoid and a bit nuts. And I absolutely was sure that he was Special Branch. My mum believed me, a friend of mine believed me. But apart from that, most people didn't. And I made a very active decision that I had to move on with my life. I met Helen Steele in 2003. We shared our story. We thought there's probably other women out there, but I certainly thought we probably won't find out more. When I met the others after the unmasking of Mark Kennedy by Lisa in 2010, and we brought our legal case, to be honest, since then, everything, I'm not saying there haven't been issues along the way, there have been, like with my family, but essentially it's been one of validation and affirmation. And what I think is important to recognise is that this is a story about women coming together and taking control of a hideous experience.
And having it acknowledged properly.
And also being, it's an inspiring story of people fighting back and fighting for justice.
Do you know if the men who had families and wives, do you know if they knew the families or the wives in
I hope that
particular?
we'll hear more about that in the inquiry. And I think, we're very clear as a group of women that the institutionalised sexism and misogyny in the police impacted absolutely on the wives of these officers and the families of these officers. Because what we do know is that the unit had these Christmas do's where top brass in the police would tell the wives, "Oh, your husband's doing a marvellous job," and similarly, they had welfare visits, we now know, where their managers came to see the wives before the undercover officers were deployed in order to ensure that the relationship was sufficiently secure and robust to withstand the stresses that officer was going to undergo when he was deployed. So not only were the women activists and members of the public used to shore up these men's identity, their wives were doing so from the other side. So we need to hear from those women, absolutely.
Unwittingly, sometimes.
I'm sure
presume.
totally unwittingly, yeah.
It's an absolute shocker. Thank you for talking to me today. Good to meet you.
Thank you.